Glasman, who's a composer, Mike Knowlden, who's a food designer from Blanch and Shock, Joceyln Bailey, who's a policy advisor, and Hendzel from Hendzel and Hunt, who's a furniture designer. So we're just going to have like brief presentations from each of them to show, so you kind of know what kind of work they do. And then we're going to go into a discussion. We're led by Ed, who will lead it, so it'll be great. Okay, cool. So starting with Joe first up, is that alright? Yeah? We'll say, yeah, just like 5 minutes or so.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
What am I talking about?
Talk about like what you do as
what I do.
composer.
Okay. So I'm a composer, I'm a commissioned composer. I write a lot of commercial music, applied music, channel idents. I've done a great deal of scoring. I've had a long career. And I want to talk actually a little bit about why I'm here. I've had a prejudice that the work that I do is very, very close in the way its commissioning operates to design. And I assimilated this conception, which I'm delighted to be shown as a misconception later on today, because I worked quite a lot with designers, people who trained as graphic designers, often went into video, particularly a company called Marion in the 1990s and early 2000s, who redefined channel branding, how channels identified themselves, which has become increasingly important over the years because, as you know, so many channels just recycle material from other bigger channels. So in order to actually define who they are, they need to, for the public, to make their channel stand out, they have to identify it visually and they have to identify it with sound. So I've done quite a lot of that work with them, and as they work through their processes, I noticed, I learned from them, and I noticed how similar they were to certain kinds of music commissioning. But particularly I learned from it, and I learned to apply those processes within music. So I wanted to actually talk about music and the nature of music as I see it. A little bit about the history of music. I think people, what I'd like to do is challenge you guys about what music is and actually how it functions in society. I think most people have an idea of music as this very ethereal stuff that you can't really touch, or you buy a Mac and you get GarageBand and stuff comes out, you're not really quite sure, but it's good. And then when you do that, suddenly if you were to release that, you'd suddenly be an artist. So the whole kind of conception of what music is, for most people, is stuff you can't touch. I think part of this is to do with the way our brains work. Human beings are much more visual. When it comes to a piece of music, it feels like something untouchable that you can't get hold of. However, among musicians, it's not composers, rather, it's not like that at all. To us, it's craft. It's something we know how to do. And so I think that there's a kind of certain distance between people and music and how music is used that could be considered false. There's another strand to that, which lies in this picture here, which is the only exhibit I brought with me. Does anybody know about Pre-Raphaelites? This is Chatterton. It's a famous picture that hangs in the Tate. And the reason it's important is because it's one of those things that in British society has defined what art and artists are to the general public. Here's a kind of sort of crucifixion scene, well, crucifixion, but it's a kind of martyrdom scene of the artist who's committed suicide in his garret. So I think in terms of how people see musical culture as well, there is this idea that the composer is an artist. And this is so completely at odds with musical history. Since the earliest days, we've been mostly what composition and music is about, has been commissioning. It's about, we want a piece for a mass in a church, we want a dance, we want whatever the commission is. Composers are hired guns, we do our work. And when a commission comes along, there is a client, there is an end product in mind that actually has a purpose. And that's what I do. That's what I've done for most of my career, and that's what composers throughout history have done, is create music for purpose through what have been in the past very ill-defined processes, but in certain parts of music can be well-defined. So I've come along with this challenge to you about what music is and what it's supposed to be about, to tell me in what ways what I do isn't really about design. I've had the immense privilege these last 2 weeks to sit in a room with Thomas Hedwick, with him talking about his career in design and the essence of design. And one of the people that came to join him in this talk, it's a long story how I got to be in this room with them, was Anthony Gormley. And they talked passionately about their relationship with the people they call makers. So when Anthony Gormley talks about the Angel of the North, he talks about that it was constructed by local workers that still had the traditional craft skills to make the Angel of the North an appropriate monument to the people of that region. And Hedwick talks too about his relationship with craftsmen, people whose skills are dying out. But when I think about that as a composer, it equates directly to what composers do in relationship to musicians. Musicians are craftsmen. If anybody here is passionate about playing the guitar or a string instrument, you will know how much you know about that instrument, well, if you're serious about it. The gauge of the strings, how they work, exactly how warm the room needs to be for it to make a certain sound, when your string needs the bow needs rehairing, and you're constantly listening and adjusting what you do. The composer brings you his ideas, you perform them as a musician, and he listens to that, you interact, and the end product is a result of this interaction between those people that I'd say are analogous to craftsmen, and the composer, who I guess is analogous in some ways to the designer, if he's a designer along that model. So I've got craft in what I do. It is a craft-based profession. In my mind, craft is a kind of a bedrock, something that you bring to a design process. You must know how to use something and how to apply it, and you must make a choice of materials, which is every bit as applicable to composition as it is to other disciplines. You've got to have an application somewhere you're going to send it. You've got to have a client that who's going to be a bugger, and you're going to have to negotiate with and compromise with on the way. And in the end, you've got to have a process, whether that's in your head and it's in your own personal way of coming up with a composition, or if, like me, you're sometimes working on complex audio branding projects. I'm working on one for Chinese state media. Then you've got to have a really strong conception of what steps you're going to get to, where the client's going to sign off on those stages to get you to somewhere, and everybody understands where the project's ending up and what it's going to do. Anyway, that's my conception of why I'm here and my challenge.
Okay, so Mike, would you like to come up here?
Actually, if I just say next slide, if that's all right, then that's good. If you go slideshow, and then full screen there. Oh, it's not, I think, isn't it? Press that. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and just hover over that, and I'll let you know. That's right. Hi, yeah. So I'm from Blanch and Shock. There are in fact 3 of us, but we describe ourselves really as a cross between a catering company and a design studio. So everything pretty much with us starts with food. We make food. We are effectively chefs. So to all intents and purposes, we're a catering company really, but we do think that it's useful, at least, to describe ourselves as food designers, as a food design studio. We haven't exactly got a specific design background. For my part, I've been interested more in kind of relational aesthetics in art, so artwork that happens at the interaction between people more than anything, and that's kind of where I was coming from. We wanted to make food for people. The other two, Josh and Amy, Josh has a photography background really more and a chefing background, Amy film and animation one. So no specific design credentials, if you like. But anyway, so we're not desperately precious about describing ourselves in this way, but it's what we've settled on, and maybe some of these images will help to explain a bit why or how. Okay, so this is an example of a dish from the tasting menu. Really just including this to show you kind of what our food looks like, if you like, rather than the weird stuff. This is cured sea bream with pickled beetroot, grilled fennel and amaranth cress. So I kind of wanted to include this to show you a kind of design dish, but I'm not going to tell you really that this is design as such. This is food. It tells you a little bit about our ethos in terms of seasonal ingredients, in terms of trying to use sustainable species and locally sourced food. So if you go on to the next slide, please. This is maybe where something more like design starts to creep in. This, if you like, might be an example of, I guess, a kind of interaction design, if you like. This was a place setting from the Guangzhou Design Biennial launch night last year in London. In fact, that's South Korean Design Biennial. What you've got on the left here are 3 syringes, and what you can't see in this photo is above the place setting you've got 3 bread rolls hanging from the ceiling on fishing wire. And the idea is the syringes are used to dress the bread rolls, and then you can choose to either eat them with your hands or just eat them with your face, basically. And you've got an elderflower vinegar in one of those. You've got sunflower oil in one, and that's a fresh mascarpone in there. This tube here was used to insert into wine bottles, and then people were drinking their wine from the bottle with a tube for the evening, which you can kind of imagine where that went. Yeah, so that was part of the Guangzhou menu. If you go on to the next one, please. We also could be interested in manipulating the form of the food itself. So this is a kilner jar here, a classic kilner mason jar with chocolate soil in, with chocolate truffles in, and molten salt, and this is an edible flour just on there. So that's the kind of dish as people would eventually eat it. But if you pop onto the next slide, this is how they were served to people. You've got a small LED light inside the lid of each of those kilner jars, and they've been pre-filled with wood smoke. So they're taken out in low light, and people receive a kilner jar each. They take the lid off, and the smoke comes out. It's sort of spotlit by the LED, and then they eat food out of the kilners. Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in the spectacle, and also in how you interact with your food, how you kind of approach each dish. Can you pop on this next one? Thanks. This is Crystal, looking magnificent. This was a bone dinner, this meal. It was commissioned from Curators Campanis in Birmingham, and this was one of the canapes. It was bacon wrapped around chicken bone, in that case, I think it's chicken thigh. And it was then roasted in that format and delivered to people on tiles. And so this was in quite a kind of formal gallery setting. You just had people basically gnawing meat from bones. And this was Gordon Matta Clark. This was a kind of like inspired by original meal by Gordon Matta Clark, food in Europe in the 70s, which was a bone dinner, a meal based on bones. We took that commission and came up with a whole set of new dishes, really, but that was the starting point for this. If you go on to the next slide, please. One of the best things about that event, though, is this was a collaboration with a designer, jewellery designer, Elizabeth Short. So when people had eaten food off their bones, they were then taken and cleaned up, and within the timing of the meal, the bones were worked on to form jewellery. She went through 40 bones in the space of about 2 hours to make very quick pieces for people, and then they wore them away. They got the bone back that they'd actually taken to the canapé. They were labelled, and they took them away, that was a nice kind of interaction with another maker. If you go on to the next slide, please. We're also interested in the scientific kind of processes behind making dishes. So this is, well, there's 2 things here, I suppose, of note. One is this is using liquid nitrogen to make ice cream. So we use liquid nitrogen to make ice cream not just because it's kind of theatrically interesting or spectacular, but it also forms the smallest ice crystals in the ice cream when you make it. so you get the smoothest ice cream you possibly can, and it also forms ice cream in the space of about 30 seconds, so it's incredibly fast. And also up in Connaught you've got an immersion circulator, which is a device for heating a water bath to 0.1 centigrade accuracy. We use that for a lot of different things. You can, for example, see the difference in cooking eggs to half-degree difference. Will give you amazing different textural results. Here it's being rather cheaply used to hot chocolate, but it's got a lot of very interesting applications. If you pop on to the next slide, please. This is a more kind of expansive use of liquid nitrogen. In the corner there, you have what's called, we call it kind of dragon's breath popcorn, if you like, when it's formed into more sort of popcorn-like shapes or pop shapes. But this is a coffee mousse that's been extruded into nitrogen, and that is then you eat that when it's really quite cold, and you get steam coming out of your nose, which is like kind of dragon's breath. But it's basically a way of just like extruding foam into things, freezing it up, and then it instantly takes that form. The chocolate on top is also nitrogen that's just done freehand from melted chocolate, so you can kind of make nests or all sorts of shapes. And then this is just a milk foam that's been foamed with nitrous oxide. Next slide, please. These I find interesting in a really geeky way, but they're actually quite unassuming. They're just lingonberry meringues, so meringues flavoured with lingonberry juice. And they're really tasty, but they don't look like much. But I was thinking about this dish earlier on and thought there's 3 different dehydrations that have gone on in the possibility of actually this coming to be. So I thought I'd mention that in terms of technical process in making food. So number 1, they're made with egg white powder as well as just eggs. That's a really great way of making meringues because you can add a liquid flavour like coffee or a juice or whatever, and then make up the water that was lost in the making of the egg white powder with flavour. So you're always kind of able to build in as much flavour as possible without sacrificing texture. So 1, the egg whites have been dehydrated previously commercially in order to produce those. 2, they're dehydrated rather than cooked, which gives them this incredibly crunchy texture. And you never get any browning that you don't want. You can control precise temperature they're cooked at. And then 3, they're dressed in lyophilized raspberry powder, which is freeze-dried raspberries. So incredibly expensive machines go to doing that. It's something I never do myself, unfortunately, but it's kind of lab kit. You buy this powder commercially, but it's been freeze-dried. So there's meringues with raspberry powder, but it's through drying processes. And I kind of find that personally a very geeky way, really interesting. And then last thing, am I really forever? Yeah. All right, final slide then. This is interesting to me because it's a bit about the relationship between kind of commercial food processes and home ones, or like restaurant ones, if you like. These are spherified mojitos. So what you have is a kind of liquid centre, but a gelled outside. They burst in your mouth, and they're made by reacting sodium albumate, which is a seaweed extract, with calcium, salts of calcium, basically. So it's interesting how fine dining, if you like, or kind of experiential dining has a relationship between food and the food industry, I think, in terms of using chemicals and things like that. Yeah, thanks for bearing with
I don't have any lovely slides, I'm afraid. I'm just going to talk a little bit. So I work for a think tank called Policy Connect, and what Policy Connect does is support parliamentary work that happens across lots of different sectors. So they do stuff to do with health policy, skills policy, lots of different sustainability type things. And my bit is design, innovation and manufacturing. Something I sort of fell into slightly by accident. I was working for an architect and sort of a little bit disillusioned and wanted to be having some slightly higher level conversations rather than spending all my time sort of drawing lines on a screen. I sort of started interning actually for this think tank and then ended up staying. And I think it probably helps that I have a design background in terms of what I'm doing, because the main challenge that I sort of come across on a daily basis is that a lot of people most people that I'm working with in the policy field, so parliamentarians, civil servants, people who work for government departments, don't really know what you mean when you say design. It's sort of a concept that they can't really grasp hold of. So, or if they can, they think it means something very specific, like cushions, or possibly buildings, or possibly fashion. That's quite a common one. But no real concept of it is something that might underpin all of those things. And so I suppose my job is basically through working through Parliament, to kind of try and sort of promote that idea that design is something that's useful in lots of different spheres and sectors, and for society, and the economy, and all that kind of thing. And also sort of promote the idea to designers that they might be useful in a sort of policy context. Like they might have something to say about politics and policy and how policy gets shaped. So it's really sort of like acting as a conduit basically between people who talk about policy and develop policy, so government, parliament, and then the design industry, design practitioners, design thinkers, design academics, design people. So at the moment, there's sort of two. I mean, we do a similar thing for manufacturing actually, but in the design sort of bit, there's two main things I'm working on. One is to do with design education, which is a sort of a stream of work that's evolved because of all the changes that have been happening to university funding, and also changes that are sort of coming to the national curriculum, which might mean possibly that art and design technology will no longer be sort of core subjects on the national curriculum, which obviously the design industry and lots of other industries are rightly sort of concerned about. So we've been doing quite a lot of what's effectively lobbying work in Parliament, just trying to explain, what those subjects, courses are useful for. But we've also done some slightly more geeky work around sort of investigating that link between the design education system as a whole, so from school all the way through to, well, you guys, I suppose, and the relationship between that system and sort of economic growth, so like the UK's sort of economic performance, basically. And through doing that, we kind of sort of developed this idea of a kind of a national design capacity. So that's on the one hand, all the people who are kind of practicing professional designers, and on the other hand, all the people who aren't practicing professional designers but really need to have some kind of understanding of what that means. Because if you don't have sort of clients, commissioners, people who have some kind of, even if not a particular craft or skill, an understanding of design, then sort of it makes it much harder for sort of good design to permeate the world. So that's one thing. And the other thing is about public services and how public services and how the public sector operates, and how sort of design thinking, I suppose, might contribute to that. So I suppose if you think of government and all of its systems as one sort of giant design system, then if you could sort of conceive of it that way, then you conceive of it as something that you could redesign, and therefore that makes kind of design methodologies relevant as a kind of skill set for government. But they don't see it like that, so that's kind of what this next piece of work we're going to be trying to sort of change a little bit. And that's probably, and I suppose, yeah, so in terms of why I think I've been invited today, probably because of that sort of idea about sort of policy being something that you can design. And also, I suppose, because I've worked with lots of different design industries, I've got a bit of an overview of lots of different design industries.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Hendzel. I'm part of Hendzel and Hunt. This is part of my team. We're a furniture making studio based in Peckham. We base a lot of our design and our thinking on using reclaimed materials and kind of what you can produce with them. They're taking a different kind of way of thinking, adding like high-end sort of cabinetry skills to material deemed essentially worthless or kind of not so precious, and seeing what we can come up with. This is kind of the product we kind of make. It's what's the chair? And it's all reclaimed. We use reclaimed floorboards and hardwoods we find. This is what's it from? We got lucky with an old batch of mahogany from a bank, so we managed to produce a set of chairs. And the chairs are a style of a range called Made in Peckham. And we started to highlight the quality of materials you can find in one postal code area. So we thought there's a huge amount of waste going on in our area, which is Peckham. So we thought, let's start getting these materials together, put them together and create a range and showcase what is available on your doorstep. So we started with a chair, and we branched down from a chair to create a table. And we use, where we kind of find the materials from, we kind of try and build in a little story, a little bit of narrative to where the actual materials come from. So in this case, we've got a huge load of old burnt and scorched beams from an old church. And we got very cheap because they were scorched, but once you're playing through the child-grown material, you suddenly get a very beautiful bit of timber, a lot of character, and creates an interesting product. And we kept an architectural theme with the trusses and built that into the product. So you kind of little resemblance to where the material originally came from, we kind of put it through into our furniture. So this is part of a range of furniture we make, which is called Made in Peckham. The idea of Made in Peckham is quite strong. We didn't realise how kind of strong it was. We put it out for show, 2010 Design Week, and we got an amazing feedback. We're like, whoa, we didn't realise we kind of get this sort of feedback. So we started creating a range, and we had the range, and then we started creating, bespoke options started coming our way. So we started creating pieces a little bit more elaborate, but again to highlight and showcase what you can do with reclaimed material. And pallets are one of our main sources of material, like kind of a shitty bit of wood basically. You can take that bit of wood and you can treat it with a bit of respect and a bit of love and put it into an object and then kind of give a good story. In this particular piece we did for last year, like a special commission for a piece called the Auction Room, and it's quite a big story. I won't go into it so much, but I don't know, it's just mainly made from pallets. We're just highlighting the point of the quality that you can achieve. It was called the Great Victorian Porcupine, and one of the key pieces of it was this pig's head that we actually carved from the little square sections of pallet you get kind of left over from the ships. And I don't know, after a while we discovered that a lot of them were hardwood pallets, so we thought we'd save up these objects, carve them back through, and we were amazed at the quality and the beauty of the wood you can get from that kind of waste material. We also had a very interesting commission come in near the end of last year to do with, we had to make a cabinet. It's called the Advent Calendar Cabinet. The commission came in, we need a cabinet that can hold 24 different compartments, each has to have an own lock of itself, and it has to, it's an Advent calendar. So we came up with the idea to use an old antique safe as the basis, and then kind of going on traditional cabinet making skills, like a lot of secrecy, developed this product. There's a lot to talk about this cabinet in itself, but there's 24 hidden compartments in and around this cabinet. They all each. That's right. Yeah, we made a lot of everything we tried to make out of reclaimed. To again, prove a point. You can still make high-end, sophisticated pieces of furniture through using reclaimed and clever thinking. We managed to make pretty much all the locks we could out of wood. So all the springs of wood, every kind of mechanism is to do with wood. The hinges we had to cheat a little bit. We had to get the metal hinges because of the size. But generally, every aspect of the cabinet was down to reclaimed wood and a bit of, a lot of hard work, basically. We even managed to create this. There's a big central combination of everything, every part of it, again, is all wood and reclaimed. So this was kind of a highlighted and made in Peckham sort of bespoke way. We had the range, we had this kind of element, and it kind of led on. The reason we had a lot of these commissions come in last year was a very good year for us. We did a little challenge at the start of the year, and it was called the 24-Hour Design Challenge. The 24-Hour Design Challenge was an experimental approach to how we looked at our furniture making. Like we used Made in Peckham, found the resources on the street in our area, So we invited 20 designer makers and people from various backgrounds. So we had mechanical engineers, sculptors, we even had a graphic designer, fine artists, and we merged all these people in, 20 people, 24 hours, same brief, and said, guys, if you can make a machine that can play a record in 24 hours, that's a good achievement. So they all had this brief. This is some of the results we had. We got a really good hodgepodge of people, and we kind of picked the groups they're going in because we knew their respective skills. And some of the results are pretty good. They all managed to play a record. It's a 78 RPM record. It's an old gramophone sort of record. I would say the reason we picked the gramophone actually is because we were looking at our area again for inspiration, and there used to be an old Edison Bowers gramophone factory. They went defunct a long time ago, but we took the idea that there was a gramophone factory in Peckham, very local to us. So that was the instigator for great challenge. It's hard enough, but nearly simple enough to make a sound with a 78 RPM record and a needle. And it gave birth to the 24-hour design challenge. One of the great successes was this one here. It was actually quite incredible. They had this, I don't know, quite like genius level mechanical engineer. He managed to figure out that an old carriage clock had the same spring ratio on a full wind that could spin a 78 RPM record from the outside in pretty smoothly at the right speed and play play the record in full basically. And everyone else managed to get a speaking of sound, and they very got better and better. And then the guy showed this one, and you know, it was pretty exceptional. It's a really amazing piece. So this was a big project for us. It was we took the experimental approach, and we merged all these different talents together, and thought, what can we do? What can we achieve? The 24-hour challenge came at a good time. It gave us a lot of opportunity, and people liked the idea of kind of collaborative and the results you can achieve. It gave us a good opportunity. We recently got taken out by the British Council to India to they wanted us to do a 24-hour challenge in New Delhi, which was very complicated. There was a lot of organisation, but nonetheless we managed to get out to India, and in the space of a couple of days of sourcing materials, and then 3 days doing a workshop, we managed to produce a whole set of furniture found with objects we found in India. So there's old police buttons, old bike chains, old bathroom tiles, and within the space of 3 days, a lot of swearing, a lot of drinking, a lot of hard work, everyone pulled together, and we managed to make this set of furniture that now I think the British Council have got it in India now, but we just proved the point that we had an Indian team, and we explained the idea, and everyone just mucked in, pulled in hard together, and we created some pretty crazy furniture. So it's kind of what we do. But thank you very much.
Who's a debater. Before you can introduce what you do for just like a minute, and then he's going to lead the discussion today.
So, good afternoon everyone. My background is more in public speaking than as design. I'm a medical student. I'm currently working in the imaging department at a hospital. So, you know, Marion pointed out there's a bit of design in that, some of the images that are created, but no, mostly it is in speaking. I guess we'll make a start. Joceyln, you mentioned that a lot of the people you work with in Parliament and civil service don't understand what design is. What would you say was the breadth of design when you try and explain it to them? How far does design go?
Well, in practical terms, they're mainly interested in I suppose, things that would be particularly relevant to that. So, if we're just talking about sort of what industries we talk about, we can talk about sort of industrial design, product design, because that's obviously very relevant to manufacturing. Things that the UK is brilliant at, so sort of branding, communications, sort of like a real kind of like national strengths and generate a lot of money in the UK. Fashion as well. But I think in terms of how, because it's something I've been thinking about in terms of this sort of piece of work on, which is much more theoretical about how design can be used for public services. I think that what needs to happen is like someone said to me the other day, design makes it much easier to think of design as being something like physics that like is everywhere and there's an element of it in everything. But not everyone is a physicist, and not everyone is a designer. But people don't see design like that. I mean, they would understand that if people said that about physics, they would know about gravity and all that kind of thing. but not a lot of people think of design in the same way. So I think that's the challenge, is to sort of maybe like what you call sort of like advocate that thought to it.
Okay. Mike, you said that a lot of the work you do is with aesthetics and how it relates to people. Would you say that you know, the sole way in which you use design is in an aesthetic way or in a broader context?
No, definitely in a broader context, I think. I'd almost say maybe less in a formal kind of aesthetic way, and maybe more in terms of trying to determine like the texture of something, how it eats. I mean, in a sense that's built into aesthetics, but if I read that more in terms of the visual perhaps, then no, I think like, and I think that's a big assumption to make. But when I think about, I don't know, something that I maybe wanted to talk about earlier on, but at the time was ratios. So if you think about the way you make a cake, for example, or you make any type of kind of bread product, cake, biscuits, something like that, you're going to have a kind of relationship between, say, eggs, sugar, flour, butter, or variants on those different fats, sugars, leavening agents, things like that. So the sky's the limit really in terms of the different permutations of all of that. And I'm kind of interested at that level in how food is kind of created with a kind of goal of texture, for example, or of you know, how it eats rather than necessarily just how it looks or even how it tastes.
Okay, and Jan, with your team, how does design shape the way you use the objects that you find and the sort of frameworks that you work in?
Well, we've got quite a big team. It's more a family than team. But everyone has, they're all from different varied backgrounds. We have designers, engineers, we have sculptors, artists, illustrators. And we kind of incubate them, house them all in our workshop. And everyone has a little point to say about every object. You know, people come across, so we don't really reappropriate objects. We kind of get a raw material and then we use the word upcycle into actually a new product. And we give it meaning by its origin. So we find it in a church, we kind of maybe try and get a bit of that key architectural detail, or we try and always get a little story. But it's kind of shared with everyone. Everyone has a little say on what we've got and how it can work. And you instigate an idea in a prototype and then just putting it out there. And there's enough people kind of filtering through the workshop that there's always a solid opinion to kind of build off and take the prototype into kind of our level of batch production that we feel happy enough with, that it's feasible and it's got enough meaning and sense to push it as a product.
Do you think different people within the team have different meanings of design for themselves and that reflects what they present to the group?
Yeah, I mean everyone's got an opinion on what they're going to say about, but yeah, for sure. I mean everyone's got this. If you're running a business in that design sense, you always want to put people around you that are different. But kind of there's a, you know it's kind of like everyone knows kind of where you want to go. It's really good to have that very, very good opinion on their point of view and their background, because they're always bringing in other people, which are key instigators in projects sometimes. You know, if you've got your illustrator, you need, the project's often quite, I don't know how to say it. Well, if it's a bespoke project, for instance, it's a big project, it's a big commission, there's a lot of kind of elements that go to it. There's the end goal, which is, the holy grail of finishing in time. But then to get to that point is, you have to go through so much different process, like the design, getting in a great illustrator to help kind of instigate the idea, and it kind of picks up a bit of his, it feeds through so many people that they always kind of leave a little bit of their mark. We can explain to them, this is the idea, but it kind of filters through the illustrator, from the illustrator back to me, then back to the illustrator, and it's kind of Chinese whispers in a sense. You have that vision, but it kind of builds in, it's just a nice way to work.
Joe, do you see a difference between art in the sense that you were talking about, the way music is performed, and design in terms of composition?
That's a really big question. It's about what constitutes art, and then you've got a huge debate about when what is art. For me, I think, putting aside what I understand to be kind of conceptual art, something like music is craft-based, and like anything that's craft-based, you can create something for a purpose, and those who take it up to an extremely high level may well produce something that's transcendent that other people may define as art. I don't think it's for somebody with GarageBand to say, I'm an artist. It just doesn't work like that. I feel very much that the borderline is something that's defined by other people when the music achieves a certain kind of level. And I think in this country, again, because of our attitudes to it, we look to art in very particular places, so that we're very unlikely to look at a piece of commercial music and say, I want that on my iPod, because we categorise music in very particular ways. Whereas in portrait painting, might be a lousy portrait painted by somebody, but it's it's art. It's in a frame and it's up on the wall. So,
Mike, do you have the same sort of element of design being associated with purpose and commission in a sense with the work that you do?
Yeah, I think so. I think I don't know, the irony in this for me, I suppose, is that everything we make is made to be destroyed, which is sort of my favourite thing almost about the process. It's just like you can spend 3 days cooking something, or you can spend several months thinking about a dish, but ultimately it's probably going to get eaten in a few minutes, and then you know where it goes from there. And that's a nice sort of humbling kind of ghost sort of behind everything we do. But yeah, I mean we do function basically on commissions a lot of the time. So yeah, that process or those different processes are very much kind of continuing thing for us. Collaborating, we do a lot of collaborating with people working in different kind of ways, like with graphic designers again, like researchers, sometimes scientists, increasingly more. But yeah, ultimately to be humble.
Joceyln, do you think your background as an architect reflects how you see design in the context in which you work?
Well, I mean, I got into architecture, I suppose, because I was always quite interested in, well, to be honest, in sort of just like things being lovely, and so probably from quite an aesthetic point of view, like, and in being able to sort of shape my environment. But I think having spent now a lot more time thinking about it, like obviously that's sort of what, things being lovely is one element of like good design. But I think it's sort of, I think it's something, I've come around to a position where it's something much more fundamental than kind of, just sort of architecture looking nice, for example. I mean, and that's that's incredibly trite, and that isn't the only reason I went to architecture. But I think having done this job has really broadened my idea of what I think design is. Definitely. And actually, I was also just wanted to say, like, just in response to this point, like, I think it's interesting about the relationship between craft and art, and you've got to have 10,000 hours or whatever it is, and actually, like, I mean, like if you take someone like Mozart, who's he's an artist, right? But actually, that's all of that is based on him just working really, really hard and really developing his craft, and just reflecting on things that you've all said about your own practices. It's like just the sheer technical expertise is just fundamental to what you're doing. Like you just, the fact that you know that thing about sort of egg whites and putting egg whites or dry egg white into making meringues, like that's niche. Not many people know that. So, and that takes a lot of time and effort and practice, and I think that's the thing that's quite often really underappreciated. The kind of like the sort of the extent of craft that's necessary for practicing like science or whatever. People think it's just about like doing some spraying some gold on some MDF and like there's your interior really stuff.
Jan, do you think like do you think your work with reclaiming bits of material has changed the way in which you see everyday objects and their design or their opportunities to be designed?
Not just changed it. I mean, you appreciate objects for what they are when objects work. But there's ways you can change people's perception, which is what we're kind of trying to do by taking the lesser good material in a sense, and then kind of giving it that kind of meaning that people want, and that kind of desire, basically. And it's quite tricky at our level because what we make is all handmade, and it takes a lot of time. So it puts us and our kind of price, and our kind of, you generally price people out, essentially. But we're proving a point you can make beautiful furniture, but it gets to the point where it takes so long to kind of instigate it. It just, when you put a value to it, it's like, you know, people give you, and you know, it's hard work to try and bring what we do, the idea, down to a level that is kind of mass accepted in a sense. People appreciate it, but then it's very hard for people to kind of get involved with it because of the cost. So
that's the William Morris problem.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, you've got a great idea, but it's just trying to get it down to the mass. Well, yeah, no, make it more available, and it's a tricky thing. But you get, yeah, you appreciate other objects for what they work, but I think, you know, the idea of made in paper is when you walk around, you see so much things that are thrown out, and there's all these objects that, you know, cost people a lot of money initially. Little broken legs, just chucked out. You know, there's a whole chair that's essentially good, but it's just.
So would you hope that people sort of seeing your work might be inspired to go away and do the same themselves, or would you be annoyed if they did that because
Well, no, if it's like an idea that you can take away, it's good. We're proving a point of what, you know, the material richness in an area. It's quite epic, to be honest. It's massive. And people are importing woods and materials from miles around. If people localise it, it becomes a little bit more in tune to true sustainability, you know, what you get in a local area. And it's working along that line. It's just an acceptance. It just takes, and with everything, it just takes a long time. We have to keep going at it and at it. And we're aware that things are expensive, what we do, so we're working below that whole level, and by that way we can hopefully feed out to a lot more people. And if the word spreads, let the word spread. You know, it's just how well they're going to make it.
That is part of the whole deal, really, is budget as well. We haven't mentioned.
Yeah, budget is
filthy word of money. But you know, when you're working and you're getting paid what you do to produce commissions, it has to actually work. You need to, the craftsmen and the producers need to make enough.
That's the highest, the appreciation of your time. Like you make something, you know, and they love it, then you give them the value of your time, and they're like, you know, they just look at you like you're taking the piss, and you're like, hang on, I've spent weeks making this. And it's just trying to get that across to someone who's not in that kind of craft kind of way, understands that you spend pretty much all your life getting to a point where you're at that skill level to, you know, cut those joints in that certain way that takes that time. It's all right if you're in a certain group, but then it kind of makes it a little bit elitist, which is not what you want to do. You want to bring it out and like kind of make it come across. But it's very difficult.
Mike, do you think that the sort of temporary nature and sometimes very exquisite, fragile nature of some of the things you produce reflects to people this idea of the sort of delicacy of your craft in the way that Jan was just talking about?
Yeah, at times. I think, I don't know if it's usually explicitly the point of something we make to kind of expose that, but we did, we've done, so we've sometimes done installed pieces that are always intended to be eaten. I mean, pretty much, like, almost everything we make is intended to be eaten, and I really kind of abhor the idea of working with food where it's going to be thrown away. You know, some people, I guess, have done this, but it's like, yeah, it's there to be eaten. But we did a piece for Icon the end of last year, and everything in it was really quite precarious and fragile. And it was a suspended cape on fishing wire. It had a kind of form that was a bit like an explosion. And from the point that we said, okay, it's done, it's finished, we don't want to have anything more, it changed almost before everyone's eyes. And like the meringue, that kind of meringue that I was talking about, is like has this really temperamental nature where it really is like hydrophilic. It loves getting all the moisture from the atmosphere. And so we had these lovely kind of flat sheets of shards of meringue that just kind of like started to curl on themselves and kind of turn almost liquefy, you know. And that was sort of sad, but it was one of the only times that that's been kind of at the forefront of the presentation of something we've done, I suppose. I don't know, does that vaguely respond? Yeah.
So,
Ed, we should end with the thought. But just to give you an opportunity, is there something you want to say to each other before we open
I was only going to say about the food is the fact that it's got, that seems to me fairly relevant. It's like a bunch of jazz musicians in a room that improvise on a theme. So it's just that one performance, that one night.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's more about performance really, your cooking scene. The design is in the menu and the way you make it and you produce it. Someone can, and if it's great, then someone can have a transcendent moment when they eat it and say, well, that's transformed the way I see food, and then someone can promote it to art.
Yeah,
But also, I mean, everything decays. Most stuff gets chucked away, and then they turn it into something else. But I mean, it's not, I mean, food obviously gets destroyed immediately, but lots of other stuff gets destroyed eventually. It's not. I don't know.
it's just the time scale that you're looking at. I suppose, well, I think maybe possibly. But no, it's I don't know. I love that working to time. It does feel a bit like that sometimes because you know, like they say, getting the commission finished on time. If I turn up the next day and try and serve them all people there, then it's not yeah. So maybe it's more about that process and the lead up to that point rather than the fact that it's gone.
Should we come to the floor now? Have you got any questions? Also, I think if anyone has questions to the whole panel, so let them know. Yeah, especially the whole panel.
I think it was an interesting point when you said what we need to do is try and get people who aren't craftsmen to appreciate what we do and appreciate how much time we put into it. And the first thing I thought, well, in order to appreciate it, they need to actually experience trying to do it themselves. And then you end up with this bit of a paradox because the reason you're unique is that you've developed all of this skill which other people don't possess that you can do. But at the same time, if you try and open it up to the mass and get them to do it, if they take it on, doesn't that like devalue your work as a unique craftsman?
Yeah, we're not trying to get them to do it, we're trying to get them to like, just understand it.
All I'm saying is that part of understanding is at least having a go at it.
Yeah, we can do
You
that.
can do that at school. I mean, that's the whole point of like D&T, presumably, is that everyone does have a go a little bit when they're quite young.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, it does. You have that, but yeah, no, people have certain things they like, their subjects they take away from it, what they want to take away from it. But on your point, on your level, we can't understand, like, you know, trying to make people understand what you go through to gain your skills and momentum in your business or whatever is an interesting point. That's kind of what we did the 24-hour design challenge, to kind of showcase, and there's a little video that goes with it. Each everyone has a specific thing, and you actually see them going through the process to create a tangible object at the end. And we're working hard this year to put it out as a platform for all upcoming designers and makers to put their work out and create a video that we're going to try and get seen by a wider audience. So then we kind of try and showing them, like, you know, the value of each individual craftsman and what they can produce.
Can we do that then? Students?
Can you do that? Yeah, it's open. 2012 application for the 25 Design Challenge this year. We're putting it out as a platform this year to really try and highlight your point, essentially, for people who don't appreciate what goes into, you know, the years actually that go into make, you know, going to make a little object that you can sell. And you're kind of highlighting a small part of it, so then hopefully they really understand like the skills and time labour involved to be able to craft a project in 24 hours. You've got to be quite highly skilled.
Do you think people need to understand that process to enjoy the product? It's like before you're talking about monetary worth, I don't know, do you think that people's like experience of this table is great because they kind of understand what's going into the design of it?
Well, there's a set worth. There's like, first, design is about kind of making things look beautiful and essentially selling them. It's kind of what it's about. It's about, you know, commercialism and getting the money, and that's the big machine.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you can. It's possible to have people who have lesser and greater sort of developed aesthetic and material and sensory like sensibility. So like, yeah, you probably do need to maybe educate the customer, client, whatever.
I think what you said cuts both ways though, because I'm obviously on the roll in the garage band. But they have actually democratised a lot of design processes. So everyone's got access to Photoshop and video editing and all those things, and that is absolutely great. So everybody does have a go, and then but what they're doing is they're making available processes that have already been established that people can work with, and then people get fooled into thinking that they can do it because they're not sophisticated enough to understand what the difference is between really high-level professional work and innovative work. So it's the innovative work of designers, of composers everywhere that redefines what it is you're going to get next. So I'm just putting it to you as a challenge. I mean, yeah, people do need to engage to understand, but you know, I have to, designers, composers, I have to deal with clients, and this is the real world where their level of understanding is probably a fairly sophisticated layman's understanding. They still don't get what they're paying for, that they know their nephew can do.
Yes, that appreciation, that's really hardest thing to get. Respectful.
Yeah.
Like you said, 10,000 hours, you essentially become master of your chosen field. That's, you know, only for a select few people that get to really give that amount of passion and love to their game to get to that kind of level and still be appreciated.
Do you think that's a particularly British thing? Do you think that, because I sometimes, I mean, I've got some Swedish family, and I sometimes get a sense that there's much more of a kind of like just a general appreciation and understanding of the value of things that are made well over there than there is over here. I mean, that's a hugely generalist thing, but I don't know.
I think people appreciate it, but it's just really hard to really, when you put money into the equation and you see that object, you can go to IKEA and buy a chair for 20 quid, you're selling a chair for £550, you know, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Visually, alright, yeah, but I don't really get why it's, but then it does, like I said, it becomes a little bit elitist, maybe, in creating products. But you have to start somewhere, put an idea out, and, you know,
So when you start to explain what a designer is to someone that comes to you, do you start by saying, well, a designer has a client, and we've had like 10,000 hours of experience, and we earn money from it, rather than just creating something in iMovie? That's like the difference. Would you say that's starting to describe what a designer is? No.
After the author comment, I was also wondering to all of you, because you're talking a lot about being practitioners and using craft. I'm just wondering how you feel about designers that don't make anything and don't have a craft, or maybe more to you actually, in terms of if you're pitching design as more strategic service design, for example, service design may not make anything. That it's kind of an open question to how do you feel that, where does the line stop?
Well, I suppose it depends what you mean by making, like whether you mean sort of physical object, physical thing. But I mean, I suppose that how you like learn your kind of like craft or specialism or whatever it is comes from like the process of just doing it over and over again and sort of like thinking and acting and making and thinking and going sort of in. And I'm not sure. I actually don't know what I think the answer to this is. I'm not sure whether it matters whether that making bit has to be something physical or whether it could be manipulating a system, for example.
So you could describe thinking as a craft, maybe.
I don't know. Well, I just mean like, so for example, it could be to do with like if you were gonna redesign a bit of kind of like how an NHS like service works. Like that's not necessarily a tangible thing, although it probably has tangible output. But you mean you could like use sort of trial sort of thing and see if it worked, and then think about some more. Do you see what?
Yeah, that's like, well, we might call that designing a service.
Yeah.
And there is like this idea of service design, which is quite new.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of, because you're not producing a tangible object, it's still quite kind of difficult for us to understand how it's designed, let alone people who don't understand what design is in the first place.
Well, I'm trying to get to grips with that issue at the moment, because that is one thing you'd be selling to government as a really useful design function.
Were there more questions?
Does perhaps the idea of service design become more about the social making, I guess, because socially that's what is the creation through the ideas of the designer themselves. They're implying an idea upon people without them even knowing, and funnily enough, then the people become the makers, the practitioners, as it were. They create the design through their embodiment. You say that's maybe how it works. I don't know.
So you say you might be a kind of service designer because you're.
In a way, I don't know. I mean, but I think we still. I'm absolutely not precious about it in that way, but I think you could consider us more product designers, really. I mean, we're pretty much always making, I don't know, okay, so yeah, this relates back to relation aesthetics, I suppose, and like coming out of a background more in wanting to put people together and see what happens. That's a kind of mediation in the way that design is a sort of mediation, but it's really without an intended like specific outcome.